Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are going to talk about Anakin Datavault. So this video is sponsored by Card Market, the best marketplace to buy and find cards from all over Europe. So without further ado, let's move on to the list immediately. This is the new kid in the block, the new boogeyman, the new mid-range deck that I think is going to terrorize the meta. I don't say this lightly. In Team Enigma, we've been testing this deck for a while, even before the Pasquale and his team went and actually did some pretty impressive results in the both on network tournament that happened a few weeks ago. So basically, what is very interesting is that we've basically developed this deck independently from them, like we didn't communicate at all, and we ended up in a very similar ballpark. We had the same idea of playing the Cup Veins, Charismatic, obviously, but some cards that were pretty obvious, like Charismatic, but Mina Bonteri, but also some cards that were less obvious, like playing the Outer Rim Constable, playing the Cup Veins, and playing the Typho, and playing the Bounty Hunter Quarry. So this is kind of a less obvious text that we were. So it's really surprising how close we ended up being with our list, despite developing our list completely independently from each other. And their results in the event was pretty impressive, but it didn't surprise us because we've been working on the deck as well. In Team Enigma, the original initiator, and I gotta give credit, of course, to Beton, who is the initial deck builder who came up with this with a build that is similar to this. So this is obviously my own version of the deck here. This is very much my own version of the deck. It's not incredibly different from Beton's version. Beton's has effectively published his own version of the deck on his Patreon, on the Super Racer Patreon, that I encourage you to join if you want to get some sweet deck. You have to join first the Enigma Discord, and then you join the Patreon of the Super Racers. And where he's published his own version of the deck. This is my own version of the deck. It's not that different. There's maybe a handful of cards that are different from his, and I'll explain in this video why is this deck so powerful, what makes this deck different from what it was in Legend of the Falls and Jump to Light Speed, because this deck has existed for a while. Even if you go back to Twilight of the Republic, which is where Anakin Skywalker Force originated from, you can find some version of Anakin Green being played. And this is no surprise, but the deck has gotten a tremendous amount of upgrades in the new set, and I believe now it is one of the strongest deck in the game. There's an argument to be made that this is the strongest deck in the game right now. At the very least, it's going to be one of the deck to beat. It's going to be one of the tier 1 decks, and you're going to have to understand how to play with or to play against this deck if you want to join an event. I think it's a very, very powerful deck, and I'll explain the reason why. So basically, the first, I think, starting point where we started working on this deck in Team Enigma was to say, how can we abuse Charismatic the best? And this is kind of the same thought process. If you remember, when I built my Gar Saxon Vader deck, basically back in set 5, I was like, okay, Vader is one of the strongest cards in the new set. How can I build a deck that abuses this card the most? And this is usually a pretty good starting point for a deck list, is to say, okay, well, let me build a deck around the most powerful card of the set. And this usually is a good way to approach it. At least is a good starting point if you are lacking creative ideas in order to build a very powerful deck. And here the starting point was very much Charismatic, and Charismatic is so much better with Anakin's ability, because the 3/2 body can effectively trade with anything that can come out on turn 1, even Gungi, which is the healthiest unit you can play on turn 1. You can actually get rid of it with Charismatic and then get off a 0/2 Spies. And the Spies tokens are not really that big of a threat by themselves, but whenever you're combining them with Anakin's ability, then they become insanely powerful. I think the faculty of this deck and the power of this deck is that we have a lot of sticky units, a lot of units that leave something behind when they die. So Charismatic is a good example of it. We got Cap Veins as well. And this means that we always have a body on the board at almost any time, which makes it so we can almost always use the Anakin's ability, which means that we can trade for very high value. We can completely out trade our opponents and get very favorable trade and get ahead on the board as well. So think about it, that your spy token in this deck can actually trade with a Kira deploy, which is just insane. And there's not much opponent can do about it. Just a very sticky threat. Charismatic is, in my opinion, it is the strongest card in the game. I think everybody agrees on that. But there's an argument to be made is the strongest card in the game. And Anakin Skywalker is by far the leader that abused this card the most, because it just turns this into, and the fact that it's hidden, I mean, your opponent is gonna have more difficulty dealing with it before he actually has the chance to attack and using Anakin's ability. So then how do we guarantee that we have more chances to find Charismatic? Well, we have obviously Cobb Veins, which obviously when he dies freeze a 2-drop on this, and we have this value loop between those two cards that are just extremely powerful. We have a mini Russian doll dynamic where Cobb Veins leaves Karis behind, Karis dies, leaves a spy token behind. And in order to get even more chance to find those cards, we also have Bounty Hunter Quarry, which can just go find the Charismatic, find the Cobb Veins, and so on and so forth. And basically, so we basically, this is kind of like the starting point of the deck, and then from there it's just basically a regular good stuff red, white, green deck, where we'll basically think ourselves out, how can we basically put at every point occur the best cards in the game. And we do play the best card in the game. We play the best 2-drops, Charismatic, Mina Bonteri. We play the best 3-drops with Cassian Andor, Blue Leader. We play the best 4-drops with Captain Typho, which we'll talk about later. We play the best 5-drop in the game with Queen Amidala's and Poe Dameron, and then from that point we just all the other cards are just finishers basically. So it's really is a deck that is meant to basically put a tremendous amount of pressure on the opponent by just simply playing the best cards in the game and using Anakin's ability to get insane amount of value and get a really, really powerful, one of the most powerful deploy in the game. At least it's the best 6-draw deploy in the game, with our base heavily damaged. So obviously there is interaction between Datavault and Anakin, because Anakin gets a +1 attack for every 5 HP we've taken. With the 5 damage we've taken, the more HP you have on your base, the more powerful, the more aggressively you can use Anakin's ability without getting punished, and the more powerful Anakin is going to come out whenever he's going to deploy, and once again deliver a really, really fatal blow on the opponent. So the entire game plan of the deck, if you compare this to an Anakin Blue is really truly a mid-range deck. This is kind of, it is playing a lot more aggressively than an Anakin Blue, because it doesn't have all the answers that Anakin Blue has. However, it does have more pressure because it has a better ability to just stick things on the board and never run out of gas, and always have a board presence, and also has some really, really powerful plays, which we'll talk about later in this video. So this is basically the deck list. I'm going to go over every single card choice, and I'm also going to go over the main differences if we compare this to the version that the Americans came to at the Bottom Network events. But first of all, let's answer the question is, why are we playing Datavault? Why are we playing green over the blue? So the green, I've already kind of answered this question. Green has basically received way more gas than blue in this new set. Basically we're receiving so obviously Charismatic is both playable in the blue version and the green. The advantage of the green version is that we have more ways to actually fetch Charis using Cobb Veins or Bounty Hunter Quarry, but both of these decks basically receive that card, so that's no different. However, we did receive a lot more cards on the green color, so we obviously have Mina Bonteri, which is an exceptionally good card in this deck. We also received Captain Typho, which is great in this deck because we were really missing a powerful 4-drop, and Captain Typho was just the perfect 4-drop for the deck. And we also received Queen Amidala, which is an absolute banger of a card. Queen Amidala is so much better in this deck than it is in other decks. I mean, you could argue the best Queen Amidala is probably Queen Amidala in hand 2 because of the ability to play her 1 turn earlier. But if you ignore hand 2, I think Anakin is next on the list of being the best user of Queen Amidala, because once again, every single spy token you get out is a threat. And so basically green, long story short, is that green receives a lot more than blue. But even if you compare the base themselves, one of the advantages, of course, of playing green is that we can actually play Datavault, which is a big deal because it gives us 3 extra HP if you compare it to the 30 HP blue base, and it gives us 5 extra HP if you compare it to the blue base. And once again, 5 extra HP is a big deal in any deck, but it's even bigger of a deal in Anakin simply because we have this leader ability that makes it the more damage we take, the stronger it is. And this means that we are incentivized to take damage on our base. Obviously, we are going to be missing the blue removals, which are very powerful, and of course all the force payoffs. I personally don't think the force payoffs they are great, don't get me wrong, they're very powerful, and of course we wish we could play cards like Yoda, but I feels like as the game progresses and as we are getting more and more cards, there's enough powerful cards in the game right now in this color combination, basically especially that color combination red, white, green. There is enough good stuff in that color combination to build a very, very powerful deck, which means that we don't really need the force cards because there's enough good cards out there in the game that we can play without the force and gain those 2 extra HP. And also, we don't really care too much about the increased deck size of extra 10. So yes, it gives us less chance to find Karius Nemec, but we have very powerful 2-drop to go alongside Karius, so it's not really that big of a deal. And there's enough good cards in that color combination to actually just basically be very powerful and build a deck that plays basically the best cards in the game at every point in the game, without caring too much about the 10 extra cards. So Datavault is really at the peak of its power, at least in Premiere, because there is 6 sets available in Premiere right now. I'm anticipating Datavault is going to be a lot worse after rotation, because getting 10 extra cards in your deck will be bigger of a cost at that point. But for now, Datavault is basically at the peak of its power right now, at least in Premiere, and obviously the 10 extra card is not a big deal. We have so many good cards in the deck. So 5 extra HP is just a big deal, and it's going to make the matchup against aggro a lot better because we can actually race. One of the things that makes blue force decks quite weak to aggro is because they don't really, blue force does not help you against space aggro. They actually don't provide anything that is particularly powerful to deal with space aggro. However, you do lose a lot of HP by playing force over Datavault. While with Datavault, we can basically ignore space and basically race, which brings me to my next point, the different game plan of the different matchups. So against aggro, let me move my camera here. Basically against aggro, the game plan of the deck is mostly to race. This deck is perfectly capable of racing an aggro deck because we are going to have a tremendous amount of HP that usually they don't have. Most aggro deck have a tendency to play 25 HP base. That's not always the case, of course, but we have an edge in terms of HP most of the time. And obviously, the more they're attacking us, the more powerful the more powerful Anakin gets, and then we can just finish the game by deploying Anakin, maybe sometime with Cinta, and yeah. So we do sometimes will control the game against aggro, especially if it's a ground aggro deck, in which case we're gonna have a lot more opportunities to interact, but we only gonna do so when we have great opportunities to do it. Like for example, we are against space aggro and we opening with a Jedi Starfighters, and obviously we're gonna use Anakin's ability to clear up their 2-drops and gain loads of value and get ahead on board that way. Obviously, if the opponent gets a Sabine, we're gonna be playing a Captain Typho to block here with so obviously when we have great opportunities to interact, we do interact with aggro, but the main game plan is to ignore them and to race them, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but basically the Anakin in combination with Datavault make this a very, very clear possibility. It's something that is completely possible to do and actually quite reliable, and the deck does really, really well against aggro, especially ground aggro. Space aggro is a little bit more difficult, but we do have some sideboard cards to kind of help in the matchup. Against mid-range, the gameplay is to use Anakin's ability and the Nemec Cob for value and take over the board, and then once we are ahead on board, we just basically attack with our unit and we finish the game. So in this against mid-range, the idea is really to get ahead using Anakin's ability. We almost always gonna have threats on the board thanks to Nemec and Cobb, so always gonna have the opportunity to produce great value with Anakin's ability. And then once we are ahead on board, which is what this deck is built to do, this deck is built to get ahead on board. That's what the deck is built to do. It plays very few events. Most of the cards in the deck are units. We play very few events. We use, of course, Anakin to get good trades, and we have units that leave value behind when they die. So this deck is completely built to fight for the board, and this is exactly what we're gonna do in mid range. And once we have a board, we just simply finish the game really quickly with our units, and especially with Anakin. Against control, we are going to be focusing on attacking the base. We use Anakin to self-damage, so basically we very often in these matchups, your opponent is not going to try to kill you as quickly as possible, and however, having a high attack Anakin makes a huge difference. So we use Anakin to actually to damage ourselves in order to make Anakin relatively large when he comes out. We outvalue our opponents using sticky threats, so any unit that do 2-for-1s, which we got plenty of in the deck, and we have a very powerful late game value engine with Om1 and Karen Beck. And we only deal with enemy threat we absolutely need to. For example, there's specific cards that are very powerful against us that we need to deal with. Obviously, any Sentinel or something like a Snoke, but for the most part, we actually ignore enemy units. And the value of ignoring enemy units is to basically say, if you have units on the board and you want to play Super Laser Blast, you're going to have to kill your own units. So we're focusing on damaging the base and try to get to the win. And if you want to play Super Laser Blast to blow us, you're going to have to kill your own units. It's sort of the what we're trying to imply here with this game. So this is really much how we like to play the three major archetypes in the game. Obviously, there's nuances depending on the matchup. The meta is not yet well established, so I don't want to get into too much details, but that's pretty much the main crux on how we play the different decks, how we play the different different matchups. What is the plan in different matchups? So let's first focus now on turn 1 play. We already talked about Karius Nemik. Karius Nemik is, in my opinion, is the best 2-drop in the game. I think this is no question about it. It's the best card in the sets. That's no question about it. And I think there's a strong argument to make it's the strongest card in the game. And it is, in my opinion, the best deck to use it. So it's obviously an incredible card. It's good against both aggro and it's good against grand aggro because we can take insanely good trades and still leave value behind. It's insanely good against against control because it basically is an amazing counter to power Darkseid. It trades against anything in Heresy of the game. Even if you don't have initiative, it's still gonna trade against a 2/4. It's just an incredible card. One thing that I have to tell you about in Karius Nemik is obviously to make sure that you don't resource and make sure you get red-white in your hand whenever you play it, because when it happens, that can be a really big awkward. Sometimes you can kind of fake it and show to your opponent that you don't to have it even though you don't, but that's a risky bet because most likely your opponent is going to have to deal with Karius anyways. So, but yeah, this is something that happens whenever you play the deck for the first time or for the first few games. Sometimes you're just going to manually just automatically resource like you normally do, and you forget, oh damn, I don't have red-white in my hand. So this can happen with this deck sometimes, so you got to be careful. But obviously it's an amazing card and the main reason we play the deck. Secondly, we got Gungi. So Gungi is incredible. We play three Gungis because it's basically one of the few cards in the game that doesn't care about pink plus Tarkentown. It's also a force that we can play the Jedi's Lightsaber on, so it's a great recipient of Jedi's Lightsaber. I've actually said that Gungi Jedi's Lightsaber was going to General's Blade, was going to be one of the most powerful interaction of set 5. Ended up being wrong about this, not because the interaction is not good, but simply because green-white decks did not really see much play in set 5. I think the only deck that was playing that interaction was Hantu ECL. So it's a very powerful interaction, but it's obviously you need to have those two specific cards very early in the game, so it's not always going to happen, but it's a good option. But generally speaking, Gungi is just really strong because of how it interacts with Pink plus Tarkentown. Between Padme and the return of Quinlan and Cad Bane, which is still there, Pink plus Tarkentown is still very much there in the meta, and we need to have a card that can resist this. Moving on, we got obviously the new addition to the deck, 3 copies of Mina Bonteri. This card is amazing. The 2/4 start line is very powerful in Anakin, because it means we can kill enemy 3/3s or 2/3s, or even enemy 2/4s without dying. She gives us a little bit of restore, which can be nice sometimes, even though in certain matchup we actually prefer to take the full damage. But it's still a good thing to have. It's still more of a positive than a negative by a long shot in my view. And obviously the when defeated, which is easy to trigger in this deck and gives us some extra value, some extra card draw, which is incredible against control. So it's a great against aggro and great against control. It's great for racing. It's just a really, really amazing card, and a good reason to be playing green with Anakin. Next, we got the Outer Rim Constable. So basically, the weakness of the red, green, white color combination is whenever a unit gets too big and gets too hard to control. So this kind of happens when very late game situation, when people drop big cards against us. In this case, we don't really mind too much because usually we are able to race, and we are able to end the game before my opponent drops massive unit that we can't deal with. So that's not really too big of an issue, but it can happen early on in the game when an opponent play upgrades. So those type of decks are very vulnerable to upgrades. We don't have blue removal to get rid of upgraded units, so we need to have upgrade removal in the main. So in this case, we are playing 3 copies of Outer Rim Constable. That's a lot, and maybe we're going to be in the meta where playing that many is not as good, but it's still, I think, a card that is incredible. It is a big upgrade of Fang Fighters simply because we can play this as our turn 1 play, which Fang Fighters is great, but it's not a card we can play on turn 1. So Outer Rim Constable actually saves us space in the deck because it acts both as a pretty decent turn 1 play, because once again 3/1 can pretty much kill anything that comes into play on turn 1, and you can just trade with it, which is just good enough. It's also really good against 2/2 shielded units. I mean, it will trade with 2/2 shielded unit without using Anakin's ability. Obviously, it also works with Cop Veins. So whenever Cop Veins dies, we can search for a 2-drop, and that means we can tutor upgrade removal, which is incredibly powerful. So maybe 3 is the meta is going to come down. We're going to see if the meta is good enough for Outer Rim to see plays as a 3 of, or maybe we go down to 2, or maybe we go down to 1. But at the moment, how the game is shaping up to be, I really loved the 3 copies of Outer Rim Constable in the main. Yeah, it's just very, very powerful. Moving on now to we got 1 little copy of Sabine. This is kind of just trying to diversify our 2-drops. Sabine is amazing against 2/2 shielded units, and just a pretty decent card in general. Having that option, like I'm also thinking about cards like I forgot the name. The Village Protector, for example. Those kind of card, Sabine can be really good. Obviously, we have the how's it called, the Cop Veins to search for 2-drops. So it's nice to have a bit of a toolboxy 2-drops in there. And we also got 3 copies of Jedi Starfighter because it is the main card that we want to play against Space Aggro on turn 1. This card is incredible against Space Aggro because it will kill anything in space and survive, and even the 3-drops. So the stat line that is very, very common right now among 3-drops in space is 3/4, and this card will, using Anakin's ability, this card will kill any 3/4 in the game, or any 2/4s or any 3/4s without dying, which is just absolutely backbreaking for the opponent. So it's Jedi Starfighters has been a standard in pretty much all Anakin's list, and for good reason. It's just such a great card against Space Aggro. As I said, we don't necessarily need to interact in space. We can often just race, but Jedi Starfighter, when it's getting played, just increase our win rate by a lot, and we can actually afford to play a little bit control inertia of the game because this card does it so efficiently. Moving on now to our turn 2 plays, we obviously have the blue leader. It's hard to imagine nowadays a green-white deck without blue leader. This card is absolutely incredible. It's incredibly flexible. It once again helps out in matchups that can be difficult. So the Space Aggro, once again, we go in space, we can deal with high numbers of units. There's still a lot of units in the game that are 2/3s or 1/3 in space that we can deal with and keep the blue leader alive, even if it just means we are trading with something like a Masterpiece. That's with a Sabine Masterpiece, that's completely okay as well. And the flexibility of being able to play it for 5 and basically go on the ground and ambush 5/5 on the ground. 5/5 for 5 ambush is still very powerful. And one of the other cool thing about Blue Leader is obviously how it combines with Bounty Hunter Quarry, because Bounty Hunter Quarry search it as a 3-drop, but then we can, if we have the 2 spare extra resource, we can actually search it as and pay the 2 extra to turn it into quote-unquote 5-drop. So it's just an incredibly flexible card, and obviously you should be playing it because it's going to help us having some interaction against aggro sometimes. Moving on, we got obviously have Corp Veins. I've already explained quite a big deal why this card is so good in this deck. It's easy to suicide him using Anakin's ability to trade with a 5-drop and then still getting a value out of him. We play plenty of 2-drops in the game, so we almost never miss with them, and we have a wide variety of toolbox of 2-drops we can find that will answer specific situation. It's just an incredible card in this deck. Moving on, we got Cassian Andor, which is arguably the best 3-drop in the game. Just a 3/5 for 3 that has an incredibly relevant smuggle ability that gives us some reach in the later stage of the game, where we run out of gas against control, gives us this little last humph of attack. An incredible card. Will trade with enemy 3/5s thanks to Anakin's ability, and puts us so far ahead. An incredibly powerful card that you should play in every single green-white decks. Red-white decks. Moving on, we got Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is another really cool card, just a really solid 3/5 that has stunted us when it comes to play. It's another force card as well to equip General's Blade on. We played 2 copies of it because I've decided to go for a split. 2 copies of Obi-Wan, 1 copies of Gungan Warrior, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But next we got General's Blade. So General's Blade is basically a way to punish opponents that don't have upgrade removals or are basically tap out. We play Gungi. We don't play that many Jedi units, but this card is quite decent even if it's not played on a Jedi. And obviously it's also quite good to be played on Anakin, because Anakin, certain decks can kill Anakin 7 health. We put General's Blade on it, then it becomes incredibly difficult for certain type of decks. Simply cannot kill an Anakin that big. And also, of course, combined really well with the Overwhelm. Obviously, General's Blade into Gungi sometimes can just give us free wins. So it's a situational card, but it is, in the right situation, can just win us some games. So it's really powerful, and there's simply just certain decks that just can't deal with an Anakin with General's Blade on him. So it's really, really powerful. It's a card that you can side out in certain matchups, but I think it's a really powerful card in general. Moving on, we got the Gungan Warriors. So I got 1 copies of it. Finally, Gungan Warriors is getting this moment in the spotlight. It's only a 1-of in the deck. It's basically, I'm still kind of undecided whether this card is really worth having in this deck. What I really love about it is that you can trade with enemy 5-drops and you're taking no damage yourself, and also get the restore, which is very nice. We see the outer rim, I forgot the name, but it's a 3/3 shield in blue being played in Anakin's, notably attacking Anakin 30 HP base. So 3/2 shield restore is also very solid. So it gives us more option. There's certain type of decks that simply just can't deal with shielded units, and Gungan Warriors does this very well. So this is kind of like a kind of an additional option in certain matchup where we think shield is very powerful. It's another kind of a variety of different cards we can pick up from Bounty Hunter Quarry. And having a little bit of diversity in order to have more options can often be good. If you don't, once again, something I always like to say is, like, if there's 2 cards that are very, very close to each other in terms of power level, and you don't know which one is better, just go for a 2-1 split or a 1-2 split or a 2-2 split, and then this game will give you more options during the game. Now we're going to turn 3 play. So Captain Typho is a major reason why we think Anakin Datavault is one of the most powerful deck in the game, is because it has received a good 4-drop. Because before that, we were actually struggling to find good 4-drop. We got that awkward card like K2SO, which didn't really fit the game plan. We have cards like Bright Hope, which is only good in specific matchups. Same goes for Shamsindula. So we didn't really have any good universally powerful 4-drops, and Captain Typho is one. Captain Typho is universally it is the best 4-drop Sentinel in the game. It is incredibly powerful. The 4-5 stat line is incredible, notably against Kira. Your opponent goes for the flip. We go to Anakin Datavault. He just trade with it. The 4-5 stat line is so incredibly relevant, and then obviously using Anakin's ability, you can up to go to 6 attack, kill something large and still survive, and obviously it also heals your base whenever your opponent attacks on us. It just is an incredible card. It's really helpful against ground aggro decks, but it's also useful against mid-range decks in a mirror match. Obviously, having Sentinels is extremely valuable. Sentinels that always have Sentinels, unlike card like Obi-Wan, who will lose Sentinels at the end of the turn. Moving on, we got Bright Hopes. This is once again kind of a toolboxy card. We only one copy of it. It's good in 2 situations. It's good against control to provide value. You bounce your own unit, you draw a card, you replay it, and you also provide a body that is very difficult to kill on the board. And the second situation, obviously any sort of space deck, it's going to provide a pretty big wall that can, whenever you are in a racing situation. In my view, whenever you're playing Anakin Datavault, you want to protect yourself most likely using Space Sentinels instead of actually Sentinels instead of actually healing yourself, because healing yourself also make your Anakins weaker. So Sentinels are just a good way to kind of like stabilize the game without having to make your Anakin weaker. So Bright Hope is just really good at doing this. It's also just 2/6 stat lines, becomes a 4/6 stat line whenever you use Anakin, which allows you to kill all the 4 health space units in the game, which you know there's plenty of. So Job's Bright Hope is just being a really good card for me, even though it is quite situational, so I only run one copy of it. And then we run 2 copies of Sham Syndulla. Sham Syndulla is just, in the main deck, is just incredible against any sort of ramp deck, which there's plenty of. I think where soft control ramp can be a bit of a struggle for the deck sometimes, but playing the Sham Syndullas in the main has mostly made this matchup just so much better. We'll play this as 2 of. It's not terrible to play just as a 5/4 for 4, but obviously the idea is to play it against. We also know that Han 1 green is extremely popular, so Sham Syndulla also helps tremendously against Han 1 because it allows us to obviously to get ourselves some free ramp, and provide also a unit that will be able to one-shot Han as it comes out, because we can use Anakin's ability to attack into Han. By the way, all 3 of those cards are great against Han 1. Captain Typho will provide protection and can also one-shot enemy Han using Anakin's ability. Bright Hope is great against the early aggression coming from Falcon. So all 3 of those cards are quite good against Han 1. Moving on to our turn 4 plays, we got obviously the new kid in the block, Queen Amidala. Queen Amidala is just incredible in this deck. She's just so incredibly difficult to deal with for many decks. So basically, if you didn't know, Queen Amidala actually counters quite well cards like Bombing Run or Overwhelming Barrage, because as the damage happens, it happens simultaneously to all units in play, which means that your spies are still alive. By the time Queen Amidala is taking damage, the spies are still alive, which means you can still use the ability and redirect the damage on the spy. That means if someone plays like Bombing Run against Queen Amidala, the spy tokens will die, but Queen Amidala will survive, which is just very powerful. So basically, she gives you the ability to give a wide board, but does not get countered by card that usually counters the wide board. And honestly, even if your opponent goes for Thousand Assassin or Anakin to kill her, you're still leaving behind 2 spy tokens, and we know how dangerous those spy tokens can be in combination with Anakin's ability. So just Anakin turns those spy tokens into absolute nightmares for the opponent, because they can just deal up to 4 damage on attack to the opponent. So Queen is just an amazing card in this deck. Obviously, your opponent plays something like a Rex, a 7/7. We can actually use Anakin's ability to kill the 7-drop, and we're only gonna lose 1 spy token as a result, which is absolutely insane value for us. Like, it just is just so many good interaction with this deck. I still believe Queen Amidala is better in hand 2 than it is in this deck, but she still is an amazing card in Anakin Green, and a big reason to be playing Datavault in the new set. Moving on, the other best 5-drop in the game is the Paul Dameron, which is still incredible in this deck. We don't play ECL, we don't have a ways to play him earlier, but it's still, he is a huge threat that once again will play him, and we'll say, okay, well now you have to take initiative and kill him, otherwise you're just gonna get swung and you're just gonna cry, because this guy is just hits like a truck. He needs no introduction really, he's just an absolute powerhouse in general, and he's very strong in his deck. And obviously we have ways to give him ambush with our timely intervention. So yeah, so basically, so now we're getting into the finisher. So I'm not even going to talk them as turn 5, because they are turn 5 plays, but basically at that stage of the game, if you played it correctly, you should be in a position to kind of win the game by the time you get into the turn 5. And this is why the 6-drop in this decks are not really value focused 6-drop like something like a Mace Windu. They are more cards that are here to kind of finish the job. So this is where obviously we got Recker in it. Recker might be a very surprising card to play in this deck, because you have to defeat your own resources, which is obviously if you play this first action, it's kind of synergistic with Anakin. So obviously you're supposed to play Anakin, to deploy Anakin first and play the Recker after. So it's a little bit awkward. You can't play Recker first action, uses ability right away. And it's also quite awkward because we do play card that cost 7 and 8 in this deck. So whenever we play Recker, we are setting ourselves back one turn for those big cards. So usually you play Wreckers in decks where Recker is basically the most expensive card in the deck, and usually you prefer to play it in decks where your leader deploys on 5 rather than on 6. So why is Recker in the deck then? Well, Recker in the deck is here as a 2-of, so it's not a card we want to have systematically, but it's a card that will answer specific situations. So there's basically 2 major ways to play Recker. We can play this as, once again, as a finisher to get rid of an annoying Sentinels. We're playing against Captain Typho, we're playing against Shirut. We can come into get that Recker in play, get rid of that annoying Sentinels, and just basically finish the game with our Anakin and the rest of our board. So that's and also give us like a massive overwhelm unit. If that was not enough to finish the game, then we also get an extra 7/6. And in this case, we don't really care about defeating the resource, because the game is gonna end before we actually need to play stuff like Kelleran Beck and O1, which are basically our expensive cards, which only play 4 of in the entire deck, so it's not that many. So that's basically the first way to use him. The other way to use him is to use him in combination with Timely Intervention. Obviously, combined with Timely Intervention, this card is incredible because it comes into play and it will kill something, and it will deal a bunch of overwhelm damage to base. So sometimes 6, sometimes 5, sometimes 4 damage to the base, as well as sometimes leaving a unit behind. So this play of like Recker ECL is still very powerful, and it's going to be a way for us to finish the game in literally save the game. It's going to be a great finisher. So this is sort of like the card we've been working on. This is an idea of Baton to play this card in the deck, and it's been working pretty well. It has given us a lot of wins. So it's not set in stone completely, but it has proven to be a really good finisher in the deck. The other green finisher is Cinta, and you might be surprised to see me play 3 copies of Cinta, even though I've criticized the card so much. I said it before and I say it again, that this card has been highly overrated early on in the game, and I believe that that is true. However, with that being said, Cinta is really good in this deck. She's not good because she's always good. She's definitely still a situational card, and it's gonna be a situation where she's just a 5/5 that draws you a card, which is mediocre for a 6-drop. So that can happen, and that's gonna happen most of the time. However, Cinta is incredible in the matchups in which she's good. In the situation, in which she's good, because she's not only matchup dependent, she's also situation dependent. So she's very situational, but in a situation in which she's good, she will win you the game while no other card could have made you win the game in that situation. So Cinta, really, her ability is to turn games that should have been lost into wins, and that's the reason why she's as the 3-of in the deck. So another really great quality of Cinta is that she's good in 2 matchups, which I believe are the 2 most difficult matchups for Anakin, which is soft control and soft control and space aggro. So basically, space aggro obviously can one of the ability for us to race is that we get a late deployment, and whenever you're racing, getting a late deployment means that sometimes you just don't get to deployment at all. But Cinta helps with this because you're going to be able to go in and swing right away with her, and obviously if you got a lot of damage in the base, this can make the difference between losing and winning. Whenever you are in a racing situation, the action cheating ability is just incredibly powerful. She's also very good against soft control, because soft control will most likely have some sort of answers to deal with Anakin, and Cinta is a way for us to basically get in there and get a swing with Anakin, and no ability for your opponent to interact with. And that's really, really powerful. So obviously there's counters to that strategy. Opponents can just be playing some Sentinels. So this is why we need... So it doesn't always work, but when it works, it gives us basically free wins, which is just incredible. So maybe the meta is going to evolve into such a case where Cinta is not going to be as good anymore. But right now, I'm much more comfortable playing 3 of her, because she helps out in situation that... And allows us to win in situation we shouldn't be able to win. Obviously, if there's some situation which is just going to be a 5/5 draws us a card, which is completely okay, which is okay in my opinion. So yeah, really. So one of the strategies I like to use against soft control is the fact is, and that's again a strategy that Beton has developed, that basically he showed me, and the ability is just you're playing in soft control, and you basically keep just damaging your base very aggressively using Anakin. And instead of deploying Anakins on curve, you basically, especially if your opponent has ways to answer, your opponent has a lot of resources up, it's not a good idea to deploy Anakin against control if your opponent has resources up, because he's gonna have ways to block it, and if you manage to negate your little deployment, it's really, really, really bad for you. So what you need to do is either your opponent is tap out, then you can deploy Anakin normally on curve, and you get one swing in, and then you force an answer on turn 2 on the next turn. Also, it's another way you can play against Super Laser Blast, is simply just to not deploy Anakin and just keep damaging your base and making your Anakin absolutely enormous, and knowing that at any time you can pull the trigger with Cinta and you can just deal 1,000,000 damage to your opponent base, and there's no much your opponent can do about it. Even the Sentinels might not even be enough, because obviously Anakin has overwhelm, so you can attack that Sentinel and still deal a lot of damage into base. And this gives you like this sort of like inevitability, late game inevitability against control, which I think is very valuable. So, and Cinta allows us to do this. So I could definitely see us going down to 2 copies, but right now we're running 3 copies, and that's and it's been working out really well for us. So this were the finisher. Now let's talk about the grinders. So the grinders are basically the card we're gonna need in grindy matchup, in matchup where we are really grinding for value, which this deck can do quite well, because green is a great card for value grinding late game. So obviously in that case, you do not want to play a Recker and destroy your own resource if you think you're going to need those kind of value shenanigans. It's very powerful, especially against control. And for this, we're playing 2 cards, a Kelleran Beck and Om1. Those are insane value engine that are very, very powerful, as you probably already know. And the way we want to use them is, obviously, we want to play to put multiple threats on the board at once. What I like to do, of course, whenever you play against hard control, unless you really don't have a choice, I like to delay as much as possible the Om1 deployment, so I can go Om1, and if you get up to 12 resource, you can actually go Om1 into Kelleran back into a 3rd unit, and this way you put 3 units on the board at the same time. I call this the Russian door strategy, and those kind of late game value play are extremely powerful in grindy matchups, and will win you games that you shouldn't be able to win otherwise. So the deck does have, even though it is mostly an aggro deck that is trying to end the game basically by turn 6 or turn 7, we'll still have tools to actually fight the long game whenever we are in that situation. This can happen against, for example, Anakin Datavault, where she's going to be able to heal a lot, and games can turn very grindy. We can have those tools to kind of pull ourselves back into the game and basically overwhelm the opponent with threats, or recover from a Super Laser Blast, all that kind of thing. So this is where those cards are for. We're playing 2 copies of Kelleran Beck, 2 copies of Om1, and we have a 3rd copy of Om1 in the sideboard. And that's it for the deck. Now we got a couple of answers. The deck mostly controls the game using units and Anakin's ability and ambush cards, but we still have a couple of flexible answers. I'm mostly thinking about Open Fire, which has just been a great card in this deck because it can operate in both space and ground, so it's a flexible kind of removal, which I think is very valuable. And we also play Timely Intervention as sort of an answer to turn our Records and Poe in the latest game into absolute killing machine. Timely Intervention is at the same time is a removal because it allows us to give ambush to certain unit who shouldn't have it, but it also is a finisher, is a way to kind of deal the last bit of damage that we need to kind of get ourselves super far ahead. So Timely Intervention, of course, very good card in this deck. We play 3 copies of Open Fire, 2 copies of Timely Interventions. And then finally, this is what I like to call the free win card, is the Bounty Hunter Quarry. If you manage to play Bounty Hunter Quarry early in the game, you go turn 1 Karis Namek, turn 2 Mina Bontari, then Bounty Hunter Quarry, use Karis Namek to kill the unit that has Bounty Hunter Quarry. You end up with a spy token. You've killed one of your opponent units. You got a 2-drop, a spy token, and a 3-drop in play. You've already won the game. It's just the amount of value that this card can provide extremely early on in the game is so incredibly powerful. It gives us more chance to find our Cop Veins. It gives us more chance of playing Karis Namek. I like this is something that Sip says is like, oh yeah, Karis Namek is a pretty good 3-drop. And basically this sentence is basically saying that even though Karis Namek is technically a 2-drop, the card is so incredibly pushed that it actually almost counts as a 3-drop in terms of how powerful it is. So, Bounty Hunter Quarry allows us to search all those sweet cards. It also gives us a bit of flexibility searching for upgrade removals and stuff like this. So yeah, Bounty Hunter Quarry has just been a card that, if it plays at the right moment in the right situation, gives us some sort of free wins, and it's just been an incredibly powerful card. So let's talk now about the sideboard. So there's different aggro. So the 2 main weaknesses we've identified for the decks are basically soft control and space aggro. Has been kind of the two archetypes which kind of make the deck struggle a little bit. And for this is what we have the sideboard for. So against space aggro, our main answers, we have, let's call it War, which is basically a better version of Grenade Strike, because 3 damage and 2 is far better than 2 damage and 1, even if it costs 1 more, and does require you to have the initiative to get the extra damage. But yeah, it's been a card that's been working very well for us. And once again, to go with those whiteboard, those Vader, and obviously it's meta dependent. Every single card in our sideboard is meta dependent, and since the meta is not yet completely established, everything on there is basically subject to change, even more so than the main deck. We also, of course, have Bombing Run, which is another way we can kind of, whenever we are in a racing situation, basically we can play Bombing Run and just reset your board on the ground. Most space aggro decks still play a lot of units that have 3 health or less, making Bombing Run very, very powerful. And we also play Kit Fisto, which is basically extra upgrade removal. You might be surprised to see us play Kit Fisto Archespite over the Fang Fighters, because Fang Fighters can be taken from Bounty Hunter Quarry, so it's actually even better as an upgrade removal. And some people might even think that playing more upgrade removal when we already playing 3 copies of the Outer Rim Constable in the main is a bit overkill, and it could be, to be frank. But what the Kit Fisto does and the other cards don't is that this card deals with units that have multiple upgrades on them, which is actually quite relevant in the meta. One of the best card against Anakin, against our deck, is actually Emergency Power. Emergency Power, like if your opponent goes, if you're playing, let's say, against Gar Saxon, ECL, and the opponent goes like, not even ECL, just any Gar Saxon deck now, he plays X-Wolves, or he plays something like, and he basically drops like an Emergency Power on it, we basically lose the game. We don't really have many ways to deal with it. I mean, sometimes we can race it, but if we have like Sentinels, we can kind of race it sometimes, but it's really, really one of the way we can lose the game. And Kit Fisto is just a great answer to this. It's also really good against Charleston, which is still a card that sees play. So it on top of doing everything the Fang Fighter does, it does more, and obviously gives us a 4/5 Saboteur unit as well, which is really, really powerful. So Kit Fisto Archespite has been kind of the main answers to Gar Saxon ECL, which has been a matchup that the deck has been a little bit struggling. So because we as you can imagine, I'm the Gar-Saxon expert in the team, so we've been running this matchup quite a bit, and we think that Kit Fisto Hydrospy does help a lot. By the way, I will definitely do a deck tech about the updated Gar-Saxon ECA, which we've made quite a bit of change. I've been helped a lot by I Am So Humble to kind of perfect the deck, so we're definitely going to show this soon enough. So yeah, that's basically our packaging in Space Aggro, obviously other decks as well, but it's mostly kind of Space Aggro is the main focus here. And then against control, mostly soft control. Hard control is not really an issue, I don't think. Like as I was saying, the problem with hard control is that most decks kind of counter hard control without even trying, just because. But soft control can still be an issue, notably when they ramp and they drop extremely big unit that we can't deal with. I'm mostly thinking about Snoke is one of the best late game card against us. And this is basically why we answer with them. So first of all, we got one more copies of Worm 1, just for more late game value engine to basically recover from Super Laser Blast, basically when we didn't manage to actually end the game. And then we play Out of Aspect, Fail the Dragon, which has been a common practice among green, white, red decks to have an answer against those very, very large units that otherwise we cannot answer. And once again, dealing with a Snoke for 6 resources is not a bad deal at all. We play 2 copies of it, and it's mainly, of course, to answer Snoke, which, in my opinion, has been the biggest threat to this deck. It's the late game card we don't want to say, because it gives us just a -2/-2 across the board, and we're mostly dealing with units using our own units, making it very difficult to deal with it. And then finally, we got one copy of Sham Syndulla. Sham Syndulla, obviously, the counters to ramp, the ultimate counters to ramp, and we obviously get a 3rd copy of it in the deck against any ramp deck. So that's true, of course, against soft control, so really good against Han 1 as well. And yeah, that's it. So before we get to the end of the video, I just wanted to know that you can pick up Ibn Orc on card market for 1.5 euro. I think this card is really good and it actually sees a surprising amount of play, so you might want to pick it up before it becomes more expensive, which might happen after rotation. So now we'll talk about the card that I decided to not include in the deck. Card that I personally don't like. So we get into Red 5. Red 5 is, in my opinion, kind of a trap in this deck. So it is not really my opinion. It's most like Beton's opinion on it. I was kind of like actually liked the card because I was thinking that it was a great counter against Han 2, which sees quite a bit of play. But basically, kind of what Beton was explaining me is that against Han 2, you want to fight for the board and you want to fight for the ground. And playing a space unit is not what you want to do in this matchup. You want to play on the ground. You want to match your opponent on the ground and then use Anakin's ability to trade value. You don't want to be playing a space unit, because if you're in a situation where you can use Red 5's ability, then I guess it's great, but you're not always going to be that way. Your opponent will play around it, your opponent will have an answer to Red 5, or most likely he's going to even play something like a Grogu to counter it. And if you do, then you are basically giving up the ground arena, and if you do, you basically lose the game. So Red 5, even though there's certainly some situation against Han 2 where it's very powerful, there are also some situation where if you play in space and you actually don't find ways to use the ability, which can happen, especially against good players, you basically given up the ground arena and you just lose the game. So Red 5 has been kind of a trap in our opinion. Moving on to Sudden Ferocity. I don't hate the card, and most people only play it as a one-off, so not really a big deal. But personally, I think that playing Sudden Ferocity on it's a bit awkward on the curve. Usually when we get on 6, we want to play like a 6-drop. You can obviously play double 3-drop on it, but the thing is, like, you're really putting all of your eggs in the same basket whenever you're doing this, because you are not only so you're deploying your leader, which is already a big commitment, 6 resources, and then you're putting an upgrade that costs 3 on it. If your opponent deals with that, if your opponent has a way to deal with Anakin, this is game over. So you can make the exact same argument against with General's Blade, but at least General's Blade gives an extra +3 HP to keep alive your dude. And it also, General's Blade also is useful throughout the game. It's not only useful in deployment. Well, Third Ferocity, I mean, arguing you can play it in more situations than just on deploy, but the main purpose of the card is to be played on deploy, while General's Blade can be played in many different points of the game and still be a great card. So, Sudden Ferocity is just, whenever you play this, you are putting all of your eggs in the same basket. And if you are so sure that your opponent cannot deal with the Anakin, you might as well just play General's Blade, because she's going to give you even more value for the same amount of resource. So personally, I don't really see the point of playing Sudden Ferocity over General's Blade, even though she does give you card advantage, I guess, but I personally prefer General's Blade quite a bit more. I mean, people usually play both, right? But I think, playing Sudden Ferocity on Anakin in a lot of situations is just putting all of your eggs, a lot of eggs in the same basket. I would rather play Cinta, get my guarantee attack, or just play cards from my hand. Because if you're deploying Anakin and your opponent does not answer it, you're already in a very good situation. So adding the Sudden Ferocity just doesn't really help that much, in my opinion. Obviously, any green deck, any mid-range or / control deck that doesn't run resupply is almost always going to be like, people are always going to ask the question, why, if you just play resupply? So resupply is not amazing in this deck for two reasons. The first reason is that we are even though we are a mid-range deck, we are more aggressive than we are defensive. If you are comparing our list, for example, to Anakin Blue is far more defensive because it has actually ways to deal with late game threats, which we don't. And it has, of course, a lot of ways to restore, kind of like ways to kind of play the control game, while we don't have that many ways to do this. So in our cases, skipping the turn 2 play but playing a resupply can actually be being very detrimental. Our decks is basically built to have board presence, and resupply basically goes against that. So resupply basically goes against what the deck is built for, which is getting board presence and then using that board presence to abuse Anakin's ability and get even more ahead and smother our opponents through board control and then kill them very quickly with all the threat we managed to play. And resupply doesn't help with that game plan. Another thing as well is that resupply, of course, allows us to get our Anakin's deployment faster, but I would say getting Anakin's deployment faster is not necessarily always what we want to do, because Anakin usually gets stronger and stronger as the game goes by, meaning that, okay, you get your Anakin faster, but also your Anakin is considerably weaker because you played it earlier. So, yeah, resupply is simply just not a great card in this deck. Moving on, we got the Corleone Hounds, which I've seen on sideboards. Corleone Hounds is just not very consistently good against control. Against soft control, at least, it's really good against hard control, but we don't really need help against hard control. Jar Jar Binks is another plot card that I think can be considered for this deck, because it's a plot card that also is quite decent just to play normally. It gives us board presence and buff our units at the same time, which is great. But we don't play it in this deck simply because whenever we get into, once again, deploy range, it's kind of the same criticism of Sudden Ferocity. Yes, you give +2/+2, but that +2 bonus will disappear at the end of the turn. I mean, if your opponent has an answer for Anakin, it can be sometimes a pretty big blowout. It's a bit awkward on the curve. I think it's playable, but I think there's just better things to do with this deck. And once again, we are playing a leader that deploys on 6, so plot is really kind of not really our focus. Cinta is being played in the deck mostly because I think plot cards in general are better on leaders that deploy earlier in the game, because you get that value and you get ahead in the game earlier, which has butterfly effect for the rest of the game, while the later you deploy, the less impactful the plot cards are by definition. So whenever you deploy your leaders on 5, just plot cards, and the only plot card we play is Cinta, not because she's plot, but just because she answers very specific situation for the deck. Moving on to Huang, that I've seen also being played. I just simply don't think the card is good enough in general. I would even rather play Jar Jar Binks over Huang, because at least Jar Jar Binks can be played off Cop Veins. Even though whenever you play Jar Jar Binks off Cop Veins, you might not even have a target for +2/+2. But Huang the Prime is that he's simply just whenever the opponent is not that difficult to deal with, and when you do, you lose your +2/+2 bonus, which is, and also because we have Anakin's ability, we don't really care about those +2/+2 buff. We have a built-in +2 attack buff on our units, so the same applies to Jar Jar Binks as well. So we don't really care about those stat bonus because we already have one with our leader. I mean, there's some situation where getting even more stats is great, but that's going to be more situational. Moving on to the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, basically kind of the same thought process as Red 5. This deck is focused on getting board presence and matching the opponent arena, which is going to be most likely the ground. If we're talking about the space arena, then Phoenix Squadron just doesn't do that great of a job. It will basically just trade 1-for-1 with the opponent, which is not that great if you compare this to the Jedi Aces Bites. So the card is not particularly good against space aggro, and against any other matchup, we would rather just match our opponents on the ground, so we can use we're not trying to arena dodge our opponent, we're trying to match the arena so we can use Anakin's ability and get great value. And finally, we've got Adigalia. Adigalia is not a bad card in the deck, it's just that there's better cards. It's just sad to say this, but Adigalia was one of the best 2-drops ever printed in the game, but somehow Secrets of Powers have printed 2 better 2-drops, which has pushed out Adigalia out of the race. If just Bina Bonteri and Karis Nemec are both much better cards than Adigalia, and Good Games also was a better card, so ended up just pushing this card out of the way. So it's a great card, but we just have better card now. Moving on to our other options, so we got Sundari Peacekeeper. So those cards are cards that we didn't include in the deck, but I think those are viable options depending on what you're trying to do. Sundari Peacekeeper is really good. It's just that it's mostly it's more specialized. It's really good for racing. We basically managed to have a decent matchup on racing matchup without playing Sundari Peacekeeper, and this card is very specialized if you play against other decks. For example, it's really bad in the mirror match because you're getting double punished. Obviously, as Anakin, when you don't have initiative, it's already a big deal, because it makes it a lot harder to use your ability. But then the Peacekeeper gets even more punished because he only has 1 attack. So if you're playing in the mirror match, your opponent has a 3/2. The Karis Nemec can actually kill the Sunkeeper and survive. So Peacekeeper could be a great card in some matchup, but I just think that the drawback is just too big. Dimming Fang Fighters is another card. I think, as I've explained, if you want more upgrade removal, and you think that emergency power is not going to be a thing, you could be playing Fang Fighters instead. That can be brought from Bounty Hunter Quarry. Battlefield Marine is another 2-drop option, which I think can be valuable because there's certain matchup where the 3/3 start line is actually very powerful. That's obviously very matchup dependent, but having that option, personally, I prefer to have Sabine as an option rather than Battlefield Marine. Because I think she answers more like specific situation, notably like 2/2 shielded units that the deck can sometimes struggle with. So so that's why I prefer to play Sabine, but Battlefield Marine is another option depending on the meta. Legal Authority is also a card that we saw from the US players, a way to buff your units while dealing with the opponent's arena. Once again, we basically found that controlling the space player is not necessarily the best way to go, and we can just race and just win the game. So we didn't feel the need for Legal Authority, but I can see some matchup where this card would be very good. Then we got Eager Scout Escort Fighter, which I could say the exact same thing as Legal Authority. We just haven't felt the need to have even more anti-space aggro, but maybe if like Han 1 is just really big, which it's going to be, we might consider Eager Escort Fighters as more ways to deal with the 3/4s in space. We haven't felt the need for it, but there's definitely another options we can explore. Another card as well is Pillage. Pillage is kind of like, sometimes the best strategy is not necessarily to deal with the late game threat of our opponent, but just to discard them before they even come into play. It's a pretty unreliable strategy, as you're not always going to find the cards you need to discard, and your opponent just can top deck it and stuff, and you need to really play it at the right moments. And once again, Pillage is a card that you're going to play that has no impact on the board, that you're playing there's no impact on the board, which is a big deal whenever you're trying to play a deck that is all about board presence, trying to use Anakin's ability. I can see some matchup where this card is good. I just feel like it's not really what the deck is trying to do, and you really have to play it at the right moment. With them, we got Stella Guerrera, which is a card I've actually tried quite a bit in this deck. The problem with Stella Guerrera is that she takes a lot of space in the deck, because in order to make her work, you need to play her, and then you need to play a bunch of tactics as well. Because we do play, in the main deck, we play 5 tactics, which is not even close to be enough. To make her work, I have to basically move the Feather Dragons from the side to the main. I also have to play a package of Daring Raids, and all this just takes a lot of space in the deck, and all those cards are not units. Which, as I said, I'll say it before, I'll say it again, this deck is really, really built to abuse and having units on the board and really use those units. And if you're playing too many events, you might just counter, you're not synergizing as well with the ability. With all that being said, she's amazing though. Like, she does provide insane card advantage against control. It's a really good way to deal damage to your own base in order to make your Anakins bigger for the Alpha Strike. And obviously getting the pillage, then in this case making pillage, putting pillage, like Stella Guerrera pillage interaction is very powerful. So if you need more help against control, you might consider running a version and run Stella Guerrera. Also the Daring Raids are just really solid cards. Also finds you your Feather Dragons against so reliable answers to Snoke as well. Stella Guerrera might end up just making it in the sideboard alongside a bunch of tactics, and just being really, really strong. And the 4/3 body, using Anakin's ability once again, can go up to 6 attack, can one-shot something like a Han deploy. That's really, really powerful as well. And yeah, so finally, of course, the Daring Raid. That's usually the card you wouldn't play alongside Stella Guerrera as well. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. So give a bit of a conclusion on this deck. I am quite confident that this deck is going to be tier 1. I think this is something that we find out from our testing. We think the deck is just incredibly powerful. It has reasonable matchup against almost everything. And it might be the deck that end up making Charismatic banned. We'll see how it goes. And once again, I don't like to call a ban before we actually have substantial data. But I think Charismatic is, if ever we think about a card to be banned, Charismatic is going to be on everybody's lips. This card is just completely insane, and it's very, very obvious in this deck. So we'll see exactly how that goes. We have the next event is being announced, is going to be the sector qualifier in the Netherlands, which is going to be happening in January 10th, if I'm not mistaken. So mid-January, we're going to have another large tournament, the first large tournament for Secrets of Power, and we'll see how it stands on this specific deck. But I'm expecting Anakin Datavault to be very, very, very prevalent. I hope this video was useful for you to have a better understanding on how to play this deck, how to build this deck, and how to counter it also, because I also talked about a few ways you can counter this deck as well. So hopefully you guys really enjoyed that video, and I'll see you next time.